welcome to our fourth episode of Myth is All Around Us. My name is Maggie Mendenhall, and I am your host as we discuss mythic stories and characters and discover where these same themes are reflected in our community. Here, in the Myth Cafe, we are mythologists investigating sacred narratives. The sacred narrative we are discussing in this episode is that of the Islamic faith, which I felt compelled to explore in light of the current politicization of its tenets, both from within and from the outside. To do so, I invited as my guest the most knowledgeable and compassionate person I know in the field, Dr. Zaman Stanizai. Dr. Stanizai earned his doctorate in political science from USC and his master's in linguistics from the University of Washington. As a Fulbright scholar, he has worked in Indo-Iranian languages, and his postdoctoral studies have been in Islamic mysticism and depth and sacred psychology. Currently, Dr. Stanizai is a professor of mythological studies at Pacifica Graduate Institute and teaches political science at California State University, Dominguez Hills. He has lectured widely on Islamic contributions to world civilization, and in his peace advocacy, Dr. Stanizai addresses the prevalence of archetypal warrior culture and pursues a pacifist stream of consciousness that can be best summed up by this: build tomorrow's bridges from the bricks of yesterday's walls of separation, span them across the murky waters of cultural relativism to see yourself in the other, on the other side. Thank you, Zaman. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And speaking on this topic that, for lack of a better word, is foreign to many of us in the West, the other. Mm-hmm. And now, to begin this, I know you studied Islamic mysticism. Can you explain to us what that means, or how that is understood different than mysticism in the, for lack of a better term, Western world?
I think the greatest myth about myth is that it's a myth, but it's not a myth. It's a reality that has its own dimensions, in spiritual terms, of course. And Islamic mysticism has a long history that goes parallel with its dogmatic tradition. Unlike most other religious traditions where the mystical tradition sort of weaves in and out throughout the course of history. In Islamic tradition, the mystical tradition and the dogmatic religious tradition, or the organized religion, go parallel, hand in hand, throughout its entire history. So I think that's a positive thing, because there is a complementarity and competitiveness, and it provides its believers to switch from one to the other as they please, so to say. Yeah.
That's much different than what it seems like from the outside.
It is, and in a way, I mean, speaking in terms of the current situation, I think, even in the Muslim world, the mystical tradition right now is sort of eclipsed by the ugly political reality, which is unfortunate, but I'm sure it's going to pass.
And there's also a difference between the mysticism and the dogmatic.
That is, of course, with every tradition, is that in the dogmatic, you often go to what is considered the strictly religious part. And in my view, the problem with religion is its religiosity, which is a state of mind that is closed to alternatives. And what a mystical tradition of any particular religion does is that it opens up that closeness. It provides an opportunity, an alternative, a way of blending with other traditions. So, as they say, religions divide and spirituality unites. And so the common ground among most spiritual traditions and mystical tradition is that they emphasize the commonality as they all seek the one divine. Whereas in the regular dogmatic religion, people look at it more as an extension of their identity and sort of being embedded in their identities, they prefer to differ rather than to emphasize the commonalities.
Because also the Islam faith, one of the Abrahamic, am I saying that right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Religions, it is very inclusive, whereas some of the other religions are maybe not so much? Or am I misunderstanding?
Ideally, that is the case. If we had to make a comparison, Islam is Judaism that has been universalized. In other words, it's not within the tribal or ethnic boundaries. Islam is Christianity without the Trinity. So in that case, Islam shares those two elements of both Judaism and Christianity. And so in that sense, Islam is not necessarily a new religion, but a continuation of the same old religion, as we could say, or the monotheistic tradition of the Middle East.
And I know also, as with Judaism and Christianity, there's a book. Could you explain a little how that is a little different than the Bible, so to speak?
The scripture of Islam is the Quran. And the way it is different is that it is God speaking in the first person to humanity directly. And in order not to identify the divine with any one particular gender, person, or number, the pronouns for the divine switch all the time. But the greatest virtue of the Quran is that as it was revealed, it was recorded on the spot. And because of that, its authenticity is not being questioned. And so the whole collection of the revelations, which constitutes the Quran, it may not have the cohesion and coherence of a well-planned book, so to say, because it was not written, say, like in one sitting. It was not revealed in one situation, but it was revealed, as time went on and as situations demanded, and therefore the authenticity is its greatest virtue, and the coherence of it may throw off people who are not familiar with the book because it doesn't have a narrative. And it builds upon the narrative of Judaism and Christianity in a way, more as a point of reference rather than authenticating one or the other.
I see, but there is a narrative about the creation of the Quran, correct?
Well, the creation, there are two narratives similar again to the Judeo-Christian tradition, with the difference being that in the narrative of creation, if there is any equivalent of what we understand from a Christian perspective as the original sin, there is no such a thing in Islam.
Wow.
That Iblis or Lucifer, who disobeyed God, got his own punishment. And that may be considered as an original sin. But as far as a human and the divine relationship is concerned, there is no original sin. The second narrative is that of the Garden of Eden, where Adam, as the androgynous entity, including both the male and the female, enters the garden. And the Quran clearly specifies that this is for Adam and its spouse. And so they're both gender-free in that sense. So it does not establish the supremacy of the male or the female. And then when the issue of the quote-unquote forbidden fruit comes up, they both eat from it. And again, no blame is put on any one particular person. And they both repent, and the Arabic language allows for, in addition to singular plural, it allows for a dual form. And so they speak in the dual form to the divine. O God Almighty, we did it unto ourselves. Forgive us. And so that, in a sense, is the end of that narrative. So the Garden of Eden narrative will be different from the Judeo-Christian in that there's no supremacy of the gender, there's no blaming of the female, and in fact the Quran doesn't even have Eve in the narrative. It's Adam and its spouse, and the spouse is gender neutral, so you can interpret it whichever way you want.
Wow. So then, and again, this is coming from a place of, most of us don't have the education in it. When we see what seems, and again, this is from a woman's point of view, that there's males have been interpreting this a bit differently, but that's not what's actually in the book.
Exactly, that's not what's actually in the book. And the patriarchal order has creeped into the Islamic literature also. And in the popular Islamic culture, even the Christian version of the story, Eve, the left rib, and all that has permeated the Islamic culture, and the average Muslim has no idea that what they know in the popular Islamic culture is not the Quranic version.
Wow. I don't feel quite as dumb, but but also I know there's something else. It's a passion of yours from the poetry of the Islamic tradition. Could you just a little? And I know you're actually going to share something later on.
Well, Quran by itself can be seen as one of the most beautiful poems. It's a prose which, without using poetic license, rhymes. And that's why it's considered a miracle by itself.
Wow.
And the rhyming, again, is very poetic, and that's why in the earlier stages of Islamic history, the Prophet was often accused of as being a poet rather than a prophet. And the Quran also has a kind of a musicality. It's a sound. The word Quran means to read or to recite, unlike the word Bible, which means the book.
Right, okay.
So therefore, it was revealed in an oral culture, and it is recited in beautiful ways from all around the Muslim world. And the music or the musicality or the resonance of it can create its own ecstasy once you kind of develop a hearing for the sound of the Quran. And
my understanding is also the Quran is not translated into other languages. It's in the original language?
The original is always kept intact, and that is the reason for its authenticity. Diacritic points have been added for non-Arabs so that it would be recited in exactly the same way whether you go to Malaysia or Morocco. And you don't even have to be an Arab, because those institutions of and conventions of reading and recitation and pauses and all that have been sort of instituted into the text. There are plenty of translations, but the emphasis is always made that the translation is never called the Quran. Only the Arabic is called the Quran,
Okay.
and the translations are there only to facilitate an understanding in a different language.
And the ecstasy, I always immediately picture in my mind the whirling dervishes.
Which is a different kind of ecstasy, but
Okay.
Quran produces its own. So in the Sufi tradition, music is a very prominent part of it.
Okay.
The Qawwalis in India, for instance, do it one way, or the Berbers of Morocco. So music is an essential part of Islamic mysticism. However, in the dogmatic tradition, music is looked down upon and in fact even considered, quote unquote, un-Islamic.
Wow. And speaking about the dogmatic, if you could just explain to us the different, the Sufi, I mean not the Sufi, the Sunni and the Shiite, how are they different? What are their different beliefs? Just like I said,
the belief is the same.
Oh,
These
the
are
belief
not,
is the same. Okay.
They are not sects, religious sects. They were political parties that competed for kind of legitimizing political power at the helm of an Islamic state.
Okay.
So in the course of time, the political parties evolved in kind of or act in a sectarian behavior, so to say, but they believe in the same book, and they have pretty much the same rituals. There's virtually no difference.
Really? Oh, okay. So it's more political.
Like I said, yeah, it started as a political party, but in the course of the development of Islamic jurisprudence, again, different groups adopted different schools of thought for jurisprudence. And so again, there is a degree of fossilization and separation, but that's more at the technical level and not at the belief system.
So would that be more like the interpretation of the word?
Yeah, it will be the interpretations, like whether a particular issue had to be understood from, say, a reasonable and rational point of view, or based on the existence of certain traditions of the Prophet, or certain sayings or customs of the early Islamic state, and so on and so forth. So they would be picking and choosing on that. So the various jurists would give their own kind of legal statements, also known as fatwa, based on their particular understanding and their take on what factors to include in their legal decisions. Other than that, the Islamic culture in general could be defined more as a God-centered culture and a God-centered mindset. And the way to compare that with the Western Christianity as opposed to the Islam of the East is that in the West, the culture is more individualistic, and it's a human-centered mindset. Under ideal circumstances, the Muslims would look upon this as a flaw. And the flaw is that so long as we think of it as a human-centered culture, mindset, and understanding, which in a way could be parallel to our Eurocentric, heliocentric, and all these centricisms where the human ego, either individually or collectively, dominates the mindset. And in that, once you are the center of things, everything else becomes the other. And this other is often dealt with in the context of the opponent, the adversary, the enemy, the competition, depending on whether you deal with it economically, politically, or socially. Whereas in the Islamic mystical thought, the mindset is God-centered. And God is to be understood not necessarily as an entity separate from us or from nature or from the whole creation, but rather God is a totality, a wholeness that does not exclude anything. And in that sense, when God is the center, there is no other. We humans operate within the periphery, but because the human heart works as a mirror that reflects the divine image, therefore that God becomes the God within. And so therefore Muslims would look at God as both transcendent in its totality, but also as an immanent within the human heart as the divine beloved. And so therefore God is within and without, and there is no place without God, and God is everywhere. And so in this kind of a thing, mindset, God is the energy that empowers all existence. And therefore it is far beyond the ability of any particular religious belief system to define it in any particular way.
And yet I know that there is a word that we've come to hear a lot, that is the Jihad, which is not the way that, it doesn't necessarily mean the way we've come to know it.
All right. The Jihad will be understood more like the way we understand, for instance, the classification of the ego, the id, and the superego in Freudian thought, and we also have the Jungian version.
Right.
But the earlier version comes from the Quran. So Quran gives its own classification of the ego and the self, and its 5 stages in evolutionary step-by-step way. And so in that context, the idea is to have the awareness to evolve from the lower self, from where the ego is in charge, in command, to the second stage, which is called the blaming self, where the internal dialogue evolves as in id in Freudian thought.
Okay.
And it goes further to what is called the certainty, mutma'inna. And in that level, kind of one reaches a stage of an attainment, contentment. And so in this way, the recipe is given for individuation, for self-actualization of the individual human being. But the goodness in the Islamic tradition then is that while it allows this for an individual as a blueprint, because it's believed that in our spiritual DNA we are all programmed to go back to God. It does not call for an individual to abandon the society and go to, say, like a monastery and leave everything to everybody else. So an Islamic spiritualist or a mystic or a Sufi is believed to be in this world but not of this world. So in that sense, you can carry on with your life in a way that nobody would know that you're a Sufi. So you can carry about your business, your school, your work, and you don't have to kind of ask for privileges and recognitions from the society because you have a special connection with the divine. So in an ideal situation, your relation with the divine is yours, and your obligation to the society has to be carried on as normal as possible.
So it's an inward journey.
Right, but the inward journey is that struggle from going from the lowest self to the highest self is the real jihad. That's the real struggle. That's where you fight the temptations. That is the real jihad. What has been politicized in our politically charged environment is a different story.
Yeah. You're also a poet, and I know you also translate, but you are in your own self a poet, and you're going to read for us one of your poems. I tell you what, any of you who want to see or read the poem in its entirety can go to your website, which is stanizai.org, STANIZAI.org. So please go ahead and we'll listen.
Crystalline Confluence. A little mountain stream poised in hesitance on the cusp of a rock ledge to make its first jump as a waterfall. Beauty fashioning itself in puritanic, liquid, crystalline confluence. No sooner had this beauty been brought into existence before my very eyes than it went behind an imperceptible veil, evading my time-invariable vision. Mesmerized, I begged eternity to own the moment. Perhaps it did so, but my perception was locked in constancy, unable to slow its pace to appreciate its splendor. In that captivating moment, a troubling awareness came over me that shattered the existing reality in fragile temporality. The awareness that time is a constant only in human perception, as the reality we perceive in time and space is but a myth, as now and here are really nowhere when spelled together. Is our reality a myth? A gentle whisper of Rumi, that other native of Afghanistan, confirmed my contention. Think beauty, it's the web of your being. Beauty is mythically divine when truth is unknowable, and myth is beauty, earthly and divine. It is constantly sought not only by this deep red garnet of a human heart that keeps vigil in vivacious throbbing in its dark chambers, but also by the wandering mind where consciousness manifests rationally as a thought and intuitively as an instinct, seeking beauty as a hidden treasure. In our spiritual and intellectual ventures in the realm of imagination, we perceive and create beauty from the strands of thought that are buried in a thick mist of past myths. As we weave these threads into our own myths, we are being woven into them through icons and insignias that are destined to become the cave paintings in distant future. These icons depict the clash of our individual identities with the universal soul. All the while, the mind ceaselessly harps on the loose strands of thought, each pulled to hold in the grasp of its tension as much excitement of the mystification of the visible as the revelation of the incomprehensible. But far beyond the reach of reason and speculative notion, our desire for beauty is driven by the life force of love that chases zodiac signs as our celestial animal selves all over the constellations. In that holiness of the whole, where we are dwarfed every step of the way by the constantly redefined vastness of the turquoise firmament, willingness invites us to whirl with the cosmos in an endless journey into timelessness. In the accelerated tempo of the universal dance, we realize that mythologically and perhaps etymologically, our dreams come from drumming to the music of the inner soul that resonates in the rhythmic heartbeat of life. And in that cosmic carousing, love, the lover, and the beloved whirl around beauty that sometimes reveals all, like the prospective manifestations of a lotus. Yet at other times, it is retrospectively secretive, like the petalliferous infold in the heart of a rose. In that efflorescence, myth as our sense of wonder for the unknown often crosses the rainbow bridge to the undefined otherness, with the yearning to own it, to become it, and to be it. So, be it.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, and for also giving us a little insight into something that we just don't hear in this country.
We shouldn't be expecting to hear it.
Well,
because here the individualism is the dominant mindset, and so the collective is usually pushed aside.
well, in any case, thank you, Zaman.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I hope you all will tune in next time for the next episode of Myth is All Around Us.